I'm Chris Carter, the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, we take your questions in a mailbag episode, and we lead off with a question: are the Steelers intentionally building an air of competition to build the future of their offense? That and more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you a daily dose of all things the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Steelers fans, OTAs do return today, so I will be at the Steelers facility Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday all week long, keeping track of what goes on there. We'll talk about that in the future episodes, but since we had some time and we didn't have any interviews that I've done in the locker room, I figured let's answer some calls. And as always, you all have called in with plenty of questions. We can't get to them all the time, but when we do, we love to get to them. If you ever have a question, call 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, and keep your question under a minute. We'll try to get you on the show. We lead off with a question from Crystal, who asks about the Steelers roster construction as far as how they're challenging players to prove themselves in the offense. Take it away, Crystal.
Hi, Chris. My name's Crystal. I'm calling from South Florida. My question is, do you think Mike Tomlin is purposely trying to make the offense competitive by making them compete mostly against each other? And I mean by that is that everybody literally is on a one-year deal for this season. You have Najee, sure, Jalen is a restricted, but still somewhat of a free agent. You have Russell and you have Justin, both to be free agents. Do you think this is like a mind trick to force them to be more competitive than they have been? I'm just one of those people who felt like Najee should have been picked up even at the devaluing of a running back position. But I don't know if this is like a strategy just to get them to be more competitive than they have been in the last two seasons. I'm just trying to get your opinion. Thank you, and I love the show, and you're doing a great job, and I look forward to seeing you Monday through Friday. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal, for your question. And I think it's a very good question, Crystal. Again, call 412-223-6644 to get your question on the show. But, Crystal, you tap into something I think the Steelers are absolutely doing right now, and that's creating that air of competition to find out and make people prove, like, hey, are you going to be the focal point of this offense? Are you going to be part of the part of what makes the engine go in the near future? That I do think the Steelers are building right now. If you're looking at what they're putting together and how they're trying to make their offense move forward. I look at the Steelers right now as a team who they could go in a lot of different directions with the way their contracts are set up. And you're absolutely right. There are a lot of players who are restricted free agents, unrestricted free agents, who could be signed to future deals, to long extensions, all those types of deals. And you look at the contracts of guys like Najee Harris, like Pat Freiermuth. Their contracts are up after this next season. Najee Harris didn't get his 5th-year extension. So they have to figure out what's going to go on there. You look at George Pickens and what he's got to prove moving forward. He's on the 3rd year of his rookie deal, so he has one more year after this one. You even look at guys like Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. Both of them are on 1-year deals, and then Jalen Warren, he can be brought back for cheaper, yes. But the Steelers do have a bit of a sense, and also even guys like James Daniels on the offensive line, his contract's up this year. The Steelers have a lot of guys, especially on offense right now, who could seriously be on the outs if they don't play well enough this year. And I do think that's part of not necessarily just a mind game, but it's part of what the Steelers want to do to build the roster. This offense, as much as, anyone that watches the show knows, I think very highly of both Najee Harris and Pat Freiermuth. I think they've been held back in an offense that just hasn't worked, an offensive line that's been rebuilding for the past 3 years, a quarterback situation that hasn't been good, an offensive coordinator situation that hasn't worked in their favor as well. And I think that if both of these guys get in an offensive system that just works with a decent offensive line and a decent quarterback, they can both flourish in the NFL. And because of that, we haven't seen that. But neither have the Steelers. And if you're the Steelers and you're saying, hey, we have to be very selective with how we dish out these contracts because they can tie up. If you make a mistake and sign a person to a really big deal, it takes up a lot of cap space. That can stop you for that can, if that saddles you with a player that's mediocre or isn't playing well or is just okay and prevents you from adding a superstar that you could have paid for, that can ruin a roster. That can turn a team that's barely making into the playoff. That could be the thing that stops a team that could be an AFC championship contender and make them more of a mediocre team that either misses the playoffs or a team that gets into the playoffs and can't make it any further. And I think that's something the Steelers have honestly been dealing with for the past several years. You look at the last contract that Ben Roethlisberger got. That's what the Steelers were dealing with. They had when you look at the restructuring, I believe his last contract extension was 2018 and 2019. He was hurt. 2020, he was good for half a season. 2021, he was old man Ben Roethlisberger. But they were saddled with a lot of cap money that restricted their abilities to do things with the roster. And not just Ben Roethlisberger. Roethlisberger is different. That's the franchise quarterback. Who knew that man's shoulder was going to, or elbow was going to be thrown out by that year? But look at Chuks Okorafor. The money they tied up in that player for years, and he never developed into the star tackle that they were hoping he would because of his size, his frame, how good he was for being a younger player, and how young he was when he was on the roster. Those are the things the Steelers are trying to avoid right now. And you're right, Crystal. Not just Mike Tomlin, though. Omar Khan's part of this because they want to look, we'd love to invest in a running back that could be, a franchise running back for the future and a franchise tenant for the future if they're superstars. But there's no reason to tie up big money that can prevent the team from going and getting other players that can fill other big positions of need if these players aren't those guys. And so far, there's been promise that they could be those guys if the right situation presented itself, but now they have to prove it. And I think that's part of what's going on with this fifth-year option deal. Now, again, my opinion, I think it was a mistake to not give Najee Harris the fifth-year option because let's say he does blow up this year, then you're going to end up paying him more money than the $6.79 million that he would have been owed on his fifth-year extension. And then that means you cost yourself money in that situation. And if he doesn't blow up, at $6.79 million for the running back that even Najee Harris has been is a very good deal that would place him outside of the top 12 in top paid running backs in the NFL. So he wouldn't even be in that category. So to answer your question fully, Crystal, yes, Mike Tomlin always wants to create an air of competition. That's what he does. He always talks about it. Iron sharpens iron. The standard is the standard. He's got a million catchphrases, but a lot of them go back to the same point. He wants guys to be able to prove themselves, and this is a way to do it. And not just for starting prep power right now, but for who's going to be the players that we pay as an organization to keep around. That's what the Steelers' mindset is right now. They want guys to say, hey, we're investing into a proven thing here that we know and we've seen develop and is going to be a real part of this offense for many years to come. That's absolutely part of what the Steelers are doing. And I think it makes sense because at the end of the day, if the Steelers, I'm not sure the Steelers can fully invest in all three of Najee Harris, Pat Freiermuth, and George Pickens and pay them all big money if they're all big name players. One of those guys might have to let go. Two of those guys might have to be let go. And that's where the Steelers are trying to figure things out. I also think it's potential with Jaylen Warren there. He's a guy that's also in these talks as well in the near future. I think it could be a situation where the Steelers are trying to find a way to balance, say, hey, Najee, you won't get superstar running back money, but you'll get long-term running back money because you're not going to be the wheels aren't going to be run off you because you got a number two right behind you that is going to have a more even split. So both of you guys are going to make each other's careers longer in the NFL, and that could also be part of the plan. But I think the bottom line is, yes, the Steelers want that competition. They want guys to push each other to be better, and then ultimately the better player gets to be on the field, but also ultimately the better player gets the bigger contract. Or you figure out, hey, you know what? None of these guys are it. Guess what? We can go into free agency. We can invest in some of these bigger name players that, if we didn't develop the guys that we hope to develop through the draft process. The Steelers, I think for many years weren't in that position. They don't want to be in that position in the next few years. So give yourself the opportunity to assess them this year, figure out who the players you want to invest in if this offense does go a bit this year, and that'll be what determines the future of how those guys get signed. Great question, Crystal from Florida. We got more questions of yours to answer here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by GameTime, the app that you need to download right now to buy tickets to all your favorite events without it being a stressful effort. Right now, the NBA Finals are getting ready to get set up, and if you want to go to the NBA Finals, the best way to get tickets for that is GameTime, the app that you can download right to your phone or their website, GameTime.co. Or if you want to attend Steelers games next year, guess what? GameTime can also get tickets for that. Whether it's the Christmas Day game against the Chiefs or the season opener against the Chargers, you can get tickets on GameTime right away. And GameTime always makes it fast and easy to buy tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They give you killer deals on last-minute tickets and they have a best price guarantee that can't be beaten. You can save up to 60% off up to tickets, even buying up to the last minute. Snag the tickets without the stress with GameTime, and their best price guarantee reminds you that if you find tickets in the same section and row for less somewhere else, GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL today, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase, or go to their website, GameTime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue with our show here, taking your questions here on the Locked On Steelers call line. Again, the call line is 412-223-6644. To call, leave your name, your question, and where you're from. Keep your question under a minute, and we'll try to get you on the show as well. We got a few more calls to get through today, and I wanted to lead this next one off with a question that I think that a lot of people are going to debate with themselves, who could be this, and we've kind of covered this a little bit, but I wanted to address this directly because Andy from Virginia called. So Andy, take it away.
Hi, Chris. This is Andy from Portsmouth, Virginia. My question, first of all, I enjoy the show. My question is, which rookie do you feel is going to have the most immediate impact this coming season? Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Andy, for your question. Again, that's 412-223-6644 to get your question on the air. Now, Andy, let's talk about let's restrict this to the top four players the Steelers selected in the first three rounds. Of course, that's Troy Fautanu in the first round at offensive tackle, Zach Frazier in the second round at center, and then both your third round picks, Roman Wilson, the wide receiver, and Payton Wilson, the linebacker. So the question is, who will have the biggest impact? Now, it depends on what people value as impact, as far as things that fans see, as far as making an actual difference on the team. I think those can always be very different things, because you can kind of like take that question in a few different directions. Like, for example, if you're talking about as far as like statistical production, obviously the answer is Roman Wilson, because I think that guy is probably going to be on the field a lot, get targeted quite a bit, and he'll probably catch a few touchdowns this year for the Steelers, maybe more than a few if things go well, because I do think that he's a very good player and has a lot to offer. But if you're asking me who will make the biggest difference from how the team played last year to this year, to me, the answer is definitely Zach Frazier. And that's not to slight Fautanu, Roman Wilson, or Payton Wilson, because I think all four of these guys are talented guys. As you guys know, I think I ranked them all in my top 50 of my big board that I had going into this year. The Steelers struck really well with their draft picks. I think they're all going to do it. But the reason why I think Zach Frazier is going to make a big difference is because of the weakness the Steelers have been experiencing at center since the retirement of Marquise Pouncey. And that's because, no slight to Mason Cole. Mason Cole had snapping problems. Mason Cole had blocking problems. He couldn't consistently keep up A-gap. He couldn't get a consistent push to dominate the middle. He was kind of just holding it down. Kendrick Green was even worse than that before him. And that's why people appreciated Mason Cole for his first year, and then realized, oh, wait a minute, he's really not developing. He's just kind of a cheaper veteran option to kind of hold down the fort. That is where Zach Frazier steps in and makes the biggest difference for this team, because Zach Frazier not only doesn't have those snapping problems, but he is a dominant force in the hole. One thing I love studying about Zach Frazier, and this is where his wrestling background comes into play here is he is such a physically dominant force. And when he snaps the ball, even if there's a big old dude up in his face, a huge defensive tackle in A-gap, he has the leverage to get up under them and control them, not get moved back and turn them out of the hole. That was something that even Maurkice Pouncey struggled with back in the day. Go back and look to some of the games against the Ravens when Maurkice Pouncey would go up against a guy named Brandon Williams. Brandon Williams was this behemoth defensive tackle who would just overwhelm Pouncey in some games, and it would be tough. And so the Steelers needed David DeCastro and Ramon Foster sometimes to double him to help Pouncey get him out the hole. And again, that's not to slight Pouncey, but that was just not his strength. Pouncey's strength was he was an extremely good athlete. He could get out in space and hit, and he was really good if you weren't Behemoth, the huge defensive tackle, undersized guys. He mauled a lot, and also regular sized defensive tackles. But if you were just one of those really bigger guys, it was tougher on him. Zach Frazier doesn't have those problems. In fact, I think he's better when bigger guys are on him, because that when defenses deploy bigger defensive linemen in the A-gap, they're trying to do that for a reason, and they're trusting that player to hold it down. And when Zach Frazier neutralizes that makes a huge difference, because it takes away a strength the defense is depending on, and then they have to compensate for it. And I think that alone, even if Zach Frazier isn't all pro in his first year, like Maurkice Pouncey came out the gate and people were like, that dude might be a Hall of Fame center as a rookie. Like if you weren't around to experience rookie Maurkice Pouncey, you missed out, because that dude was phenomenal and he had a lot of promise. And there was a reason why he was in the Pro Bowl all the time in the 2010s. Zach Frazier doesn't need to even do that. If he is just a good center that just holds it down, doesn't give up A-gap pressures, doesn't have snapping mistakes, and consistently wins in the run game, that is a major upgrade from what the Steelers have had, even since Pouncey's last year and a half or so, because Maurkice Pouncey, what kind of forced him to retire was his body was breaking down. He had a lot of injuries over his career. He played a very physical position and a very physical style of play, so it kind of wore down on him. And even in 2020, he wasn't the same Maurkice Pouncey that he even was in like 2017. So I think Zach Frazier could bring something to the table the Steelers haven't seen since 2017, and that's a dominant center. And again, even if he's not dominant, I'm talking about a prominent center, a proficient center. If he's able to bring that I think right there is a huge upgrade over what the Steelers had. And that's not to say Troy Fautanu can't do the same thing in offensive tackle. If he's the right tackle and Broderick Jones the left tackle, and both of them are dominating their spots, that's also a huge thing. And that could change the narrative entirely, because to be honest, in my watching time as a Steeler, I have not seen a pair of super dominant tackles on the Steelers roster at the same time. I've seen very good tackles. I've seen Max Starks. I've seen Marvell Smith. I've seen guys flows. I've seen guys come in and play very well for the Steelers, but I haven't seen two first-round pick dudes just crush people's souls day in and day out. And people, when they go up against the Steelers, say like, oh boy, we got to go up against those offensive tackles. This isn't going to be fun. Again, I've brought it up several times. If you think about the greatest players in the history of the Steelers on the offensive side of the ball, you can name Hall of Famers at center, guard, running back, quarterback, wide receiver. You can't name tight end, but you know Heath Miller, and you're seeing Pat Freiermuth right now. There's no offensive tackle of supreme lore you go back to Tunch Ilkin, very good player, but not in that Hall of Fame category. You'd have to go back to the 70s, and even some of those guys, they were very good, but they weren't in those Hall of Fame discussions. And that's what I think they're hoping to get out of Fautanu and Broderick Jones. And hey, if both of those guys are that, the offensive line is about to be a problem for many years. And I think that's what the Steelers are hoping. That's what they drafted these guys to be. Now, let's get to the other players here. Roman Wilson. If Roman Wilson turns into the number 2 wide receiver, I think everyone's going to say, okay, no, he had the biggest impact here, because the Steelers really need a number 2 wide receiver. They need someone to take the pressure off of George Pickens. I don't know if Roman Wilson's going to be that. I think he could be a good number 3. I think he could be a solid number 2, but I don't think he has the biggest impact on the offense, simply because I think that this offense already has a good group of playmakers around it, and might end up adding one more in training camp when they do a trade or something like that, once they assess these guys and how they are. So That was there. And then Payton Wilson, I just think Payton Wilson isn't going to start this year. I think he will be a really good guy that comes off the bench and helps at the linebacker position. But Patrick Queen and Landon Roberts, those are your starters. We'll see what happens to Cole Holcomb when he comes back from the injury. When he comes back, we don't know when that'll be. But if I'm looking at the four guys and who has the best chance to have the biggest impact in their rookie season, Zach Frazier to me is the obvious answer, the easy answer, because the Steelers need that upgraded center, and I think it could be such a big deal. We'll get to more of your questions here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the number one sportsbook in America. With the playoffs getting ready to end in both the NBA and the NHL as both head to their championship final rounds, the best place to bet on all the action is FanDuel Sportsbook, the number one sportsbook in America. Right now, new customers at FanDuel get $150 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 or more bet. That's $150 that you can use on point spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to take advantage of this offer today. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. And that's from FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We get back to your questions on the Locked On Steelers mailbag today. I mean, you can always call in and get to the call-in line to get on the show at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, and keep your question under a minute. We will try to get your question on the show. We switch it now to Mark from Youngstown, Ohio, who has a question about the tight end position. Mark, take it away.
Hi, Chris. This is Mark from Youngstown, Ohio. Hey, I know that Darnell Washington is mainly used for blocking, but because of his size and strength, I thought that he could be a lot more used in passing situations. What is it that's holding Darnell Washington back from being an elite tight end in the passing game like a Gronkowski or a Travis Kelce? Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for your question, Mark. Appreciate everyone who calls in. Again, 412-223-6644 to get your question on the show. Mark, let's address a few things here step by step. First and foremost, Darnell Washington has a very long way to go before he gets to the Rob Gronkowskis and Travis Kelce's of the world. Like, let's separate that. Pat Freiermuth's a lot further along into that, and Pat Freiermuth has a long way to go in his conversations, but Pat Freiermuth is so much further there. To answer this part of your question, what does Darnell Washington have to do to get better? He has to become a better route runner, and that's one thing that I think that Darnell Washington doesn't have in his skill set yet, and that's not something that was on tape in Georgia. Darnell Washington was a guy that he could block really well. He was explosive. He was athletic. You could send him up the seam, and he would make the catch. He would make a tough catch and keep going. He could even get yards after the catch, run over guys, jump over guys, do all that. But he was not a guy that was going to fool defenders with his route setups the way that Travis Kelce did, the way that Rob Gronkowski did. I mean, those guys were also behemoths for their size as well. And the way that Pat Freiermuth does too as well. That's a skill set that I think Darnell Washington's still looking to harness in his career. So he's not in that light. But I will agree with you this. He was held back from what he could have done over what we saw this past year because he could have been used more. There were times also like in the offense where the play was designed and he wasn't given opportunity, but there's also times where the play was designed, he was wide open and he wasn't throwing the ball. And I think that there need to be plays in this Steelers offense where, hey, let's say you're running, a flat corner concept and, Pickens is the corner route that goes deeper and Washington's hitting the flat. If there's nobody within 5 yards of Darnell Washington, that's a simple route. He doesn't have to be super quick or super elite with his footwork. Hit him in the flat while he's on the move. Let him pick up steam and let him truck somebody because you know what? That person who's 5 yards off, they might get run over at 5 yards and then that might turn into 8 yards, 10 yards, or who knows? Maybe it'll be a Vance McDonald play. I think Darnell Washington has extreme athleticism and he can be very dangerous. But again, you got to remember the reason Rob Gronkowski and Travis Kelce, Tony Gonzalez, Antonio Gates, all those guys were so amazing. They could run amazing routes as well. Like they were also receivers while being tight ends. And Pat Freiermuth is a lot closer to being that. Darnell Washington, those strength right now is being a blocker. And that was something that they will highlight in their offense. I think they'll use him at the point of attack. They'll make that a part of the offense. But yes, do they need to throw him the ball more? Absolutely. But do not be mistaken to think that Darnell Washington is one of those elite guys in this conversation. Yeah, Pat Freiermuth's trying to work his way into that conversation. Darnell Washington has to prove that he can be a starter, a consistent starter, and a number one tight end in the NFL before he even gets into those elite conversations. And that's not to slight Darnell Washington. I think he has a lot of potential for the Steelers, but he still has a long way to go and a lot to prove. And that's something that we're actually going to be looking at when OTAs resume this week, including today when I'll be at the Steelers facility. So we'll keep you up to date there with more there. Thank you for your question, Mark. We have one more question, and that's from my man, one of our super fans of the show, Nathan Glass. He always calls him with questions. Nathan, I'm sorry I don't get you on the show a lot, but I'm getting your question on now. Here's Nathan Glass all the way from Los Angeles, California. Take it away, Nate.
Chris, Nathan Glass from California. Just wanted to ask you a question. Also for one of your guests that you bring on the show. The question is about Cam Heyward. Do you believe, actually I said that wrong. On a scale from 1 to 10, how concerned are you that Cam will hold out for a new contract? 10 being very concerned or 1 being not concerned at all. Like I said, that's a question for you and one of your guests that you bring on the show. Hope to hear from you soon. Talk to you soon. Have a good one.
Thanks, Nate. Always appreciate you calling in. Again, 412-223-6644 to get your question on the show. Now, Nate, so as far as a holdout, because with Cam Heyward not showing up to OTAs, that's not a holdout, that's voluntary work. The holdout would begin if he didn't show up to mini camp, which is mandatory, and then, training camp, which is another thing. As far as my concern, it's like a 2 or a 3. I don't think that the Steelers have much to worry about Cam Heyward right now missing much. And why do I say that? Because Cam Heyward's been a Steeler for life. They want to make him a Steelers for life. Both sides are going to be on this. And I don't know if you guys saw pictures from different charity events the Steelers did this past week. They did a flag football game where a lot of the former Steelers came and played. Like Polamalu was there, Ben Roethlisberger was there, all these different people. That James Harrison was there, but Cam Heyward was there, and he's a current Steeler. And there were pictures of him hanging out, hugging with Tomlin, chatting it up for a while. And people said they were chatting up. There is not some serious rift here. Cam Heyward, I think, is just positioning himself, doing what he needs to do to get one last real contract in the NFL. But the Steelers also are like, hey, we're not just going to throw $30 million at you because, you were hurt last year and we need to see where you're at. I think Cam Heyward and the Steelers will come together, reach a reasonable deal for both sides where Cam Heyward, he'll still make, more than $12 million a year, but it won't be where he's at right now, where he's a $22 million cap hit. I think that will be brought down because of his age. He's 35. I'm sure the Steelers want him around for his leadership, for his skill-making ability. And I still think Cam Heyward has a good amount to offer. I still think that Cam Heyward, you look back this past season, he suffered an injury in training camp, rushed back to get back on the field for the Steelers, didn't produce at a high level, but was still solid when he was out there. If he gets back to where he was 2 years ago before this injury happened, and who knows, maybe he doesn't, but if he does, he was getting 10 plus sacks a season back-to-back years at that point. If he even gets 8 sacks, 7 sacks this year, 6 sacks is good, but if he gets 7, 8 plus, that's a win for the Steelers at the interior position, because also Keanu Benton's going to be improving. TJ Watt's going to still be there. Alex Highsmith's still going to be there, and then Patrick Queen's into the occasion, and I think into the situation. And I think that with the Steelers, all the pieces they're adding on their defense right now, and the younger they're getting, especially in the secondary, I think the Steelers are going to be able to do more, trust more of their coverage, and be more aggressive with how they send pressure after the quarterback. So with that being said, I don't think there's any reason to worry about Cam Heyward. I think both teams will come together. I think Cam Heyward will still have at least 1 or 2 more good years with the Steelers, and I think this will be a non-story by mid-training camp when a deal gets struck. And who knows, Cam Heyward might be a thing where Cam Heyward shows up to training camp, and much like, again, why I say this is a 3 and not a big deal. You remember when guys were looking for major extensions like TJ Watt, Deontay Johnson, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Alex Highsmith, all 4 of those guys came to training camp, did the workouts on the side, didn't do a whole lot with the team, just kind of did their own thing, and then a deal was struck, and then they joined the team at training camp. I bet that's what happens with Cam Heyward, and if and that would make the most sense, because guess what? Who doesn't? You don't need to see Cam Heyward practice too much at training camp. He's going to be fine. Get him in football shape, which means bang him up a little bit, in the last couple weeks of training camp. But if there's anybody on the team that can miss some time and do their own thing to kind of get in shape while sticking with the team and going to team meetings, just not hitting on the field during the early part of training camp, it's Cam Heyward, which is why, again, this is going to get done. I don't think it's that big of a deal. But I do understand your question, Nate, because anytime you see a player like Cam Heyward, who is a Mr. Steeler, he is the guy that carries the flag for this team when they head out onto the field. I think that I understand the concern there, but I don't think this will end up being a concern. I think that by the time the Steelers are kicking off against the Falcons in week 1, Cam Heyward will be leading the team out the tunnel, and this will all be forgotten for the better. Thank you for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here every Monday through Friday on the Locked On Steelers podcast, on your favorite podcasting apps, and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of those daily Monday through Friday episodes. Back tomorrow when we get a chance. We got our chance to look back at the second week of OTAs. Who do we talk to? Find out here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.